But yeah, I'll crack into it. My plan for today is to talk a bit about what we've been doing at Papamoa College this year with what we've called our Learning Through Sport class. And yeah, just talk a bit about what's gone well and what hasn't, and how we hope to do it a bit better going forward. So just first off, just quick little background. So I am Jonathan Wheeland. I'm from the UK originally, born in England, but dad's Scottish, mum's Irish. Moved here when I was 11, so got a bit of a mix of accents going on. I started out teaching at One Tree Hill College, having been through Ako Mata Tupu, the Teach First NZ program. Loved it at One Tree Hill, was there for 5 years, but being in Auckland has its challenges and the Bay of Plenty has its draw cards. So being at Papamoa College, came on board as TIC statistics, but teaching a range, and yeah, it's great. Into my 3rd year there now, and actually going to be head of department next year. So really enjoying it. But I guess most pertinently to what I'm talking about today, as well as all this stuff, I do like sports and maths. I like other things, but those two things are things I enjoy. So just quick plan for today. I'm going to talk about what we originally set out to do with learning through sport, and then also how we envisaged it, what actually happened, and then of course where we're going to from there. I hope you've got a bunch of questions because I don't want to talk for too long, but it'd be nice to hear what you want to know. So first off, the why of where we came into this, and the big part of it is in getting to know our learners and where we are by the beach. It's quite an active community for the most part, but we had a lot of kids who like sport, and then we had a lot who were, as I've tried to show here, at least somewhat disengaged with their learning. And where that crossover was, we saw a bit of an opportunity to be like, why, could we bring these things together? The school itself is relatively new, and I'll talk about that in a second, but we've got lots of opportunity to be quite flexible. So we put together a proposal for what to do, and yeah, this is kind of what it looked like. It was driven by our curriculum leader for PE and health, Nick Leask, who he'd noticed in talking to teachers that the relationships he had, or the good relationships he had, seemed to be often opposite to what other teachers had. And the kids he would talk about as being really successful and really good learners in PE and health, there was a mismatch there. And I'm sure we've all seen that. And he wanted to find a way to bridge that gap both ways. We have had, so our school goes from year 7 to 13, and there's a year 7 and 8 teacher who's been running a single sports themed class for a couple of years, and that's gone really well. And so this, having gone through year 7 and 8, we wanted to give it a shot at 9 and 10. And yeah, it came down to we like sports, they like sports, so why not try to make the most of it? So a bit of, let's see, a bit of context. Where did I put it? Sorry. There we go. So for just to help make sense of what we're talking about here, the way the school is organized, we've got, as I said, year 7 to 13. 7 and 8 are what we call our LMS, our lower middle school. Year 9 and 10 is our upper middle school, the UMS, and then the senior school is 11 to 13. And in these 3 sections, although we all share a space and there's a bit of crossover, we work fairly independently. Certainly the LMS is quite separate from the 9 to 13. At the LMS and UMS, they're split into what we call our learning communities. And each of those has, well, in LMS, it would be 2 year 7 and 2 year 8 classes. And then in the UMS, 2 year 9 and 2 year 10 classes, who all share a space. And the school was built in 2012, I think it was, so relatively new. And with that, of course, we are open plan, MLE, not particularly flexible, but that's a discussion for another day. But the main thing here is we have these 4 classes together in a learning community. And then so a student will stay in the same learning community for 7 and 8, and then in 9 and 10, and then once they're in the senior school, everything gets mixed up. And then for those yeah, with their learning community. They're in the same classes for their science, social science, English, maths, and PE, and then they go separately for their specialists. So they spend a lot of time together, and for the most part, it's all in that same area. Right, there we go. This will help this make a bit more sense. So with what we set out to do, the primary goal was to use sport really as a hook or a vehicle or a really primary engager for students for their learning. Just especially targeting students who wouldn't consider themselves lovers of learning, but they love sports, and sports is something that they acknowledged helped them to, I guess, click in with what was happening. We wanted learning to be the priority ahead of integrating, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but having talked to teachers at some other schools, and some who've done this really well and some who've shared some challenges, particularly shout outs to Edgewater College and Te Puke High School, who've done some great things, but were also generous in sharing some of the challenges. In terms of what we felt we'd be able to do, we wanted to prioritize, as I say, the learning and making sure that no one missed out on any, curriculum for having been in this class, but then taking opportunities to integrate wherever we could. Again, with sport, we wanted to bring it in as much as possible, but without it being contrived. Particularly in maths, it just makes me cringe sometimes, the examples that we get and that we use that really, while they might involve a certain context, they're not, there's no real use to them, or if you take them beyond the page, they really don't make sense. So we wanted to, where possible, make it meaningful, and if it wasn't, then that's fine. We could just have the content as it was, or use a different context. And finally, we wanted to be clear for ourselves and for the students that this wasn't a sports performance class. It was about learning through sport. And again, that's why we chose the name as it was. But that caused a bit of friction with some who wanted to just do sports all the time. But we were, again, stuck to the message and the primary goal of, we're here to learn. We love sports and we use that to help with our learning, but that's the priority. So the plan. So last year, around the middle of last year, we figured out the teachers. And so we have, it was put out for expressions of interest for a teacher from each of the learning areas to commit to this, to teaching both year 9s. And it was great. I mean, I was stoked to be part of it because we ended up with a really strong team where we had the head of English involved, the head of biology put his hand up. Our social science teacher was also the lead teacher for the Learning Commons. And she's also the year 10 dean. And then, just a really good group. And I mean, as it often is with new initiatives, those who put their hands up first are really keen. And it's great being part of a group like that. Once we had the staffing sorted, we put it out to the students in the community, saying that this would be a thing and opening for applications. There was then an opening evening, plus we went round to the year 8 classes to talk about what it was all about, and then had it all figured out. The application process, the student, it wasn't like they didn't have to sit an exam or do a beat test or anything. It was just about the students filling in a little form, explaining kind of what they liked about learning, what sports they were into, and why they felt that sport might help them with their learning. And then we kind of had it all wrapped up, and then we had term 4 and over the summer to figure it out really as best as we could. What that looked like and what we came up with after a few days locked in a room together, we tried to, I guess, what we settled on, rather than focusing on, say, a different sport each term or anything like that, what we came down to was that could be the most common across everything was more like characteristics or values of sports people. So we looked at balance, adaptability, limits, or knowing your limits, and then performance. So we picked these quite vague values because we wanted to easily be able to move within them. Just to give us flexibility, but also to relate to them where we could. Within each of those, each subject, then we tried to split our topics up as best as we could to match up with each of those themes each term. And so for us in maths, we started out with statistics, which was fun also just to get to know each other. But then geometry and measurement in term 2, algebra, and then probability. Number we weave in throughout, so they do a bit of number all year round. So yeah, there was no one number term, but that's where we're up to. And then the plan was for each of our terms, so about 10 weeks, where we'd have 4 to 6 weeks of just in your specific learning area, where, you know, covering all the content, the key skills that really are best learned in isolation. We then hope to spend 2 to 4 weeks getting that a bit more integrated. So as we learned the application of skills, we wanted to be able to then cross over between subjects. And then the last 2 weeks of each term were set aside for a big project. So our school quite big on inquiry or design thinking. And normally that's 1 block a week that they do. We decided to save all of those for the last 2 weeks. And then so the last 2 weeks of the term, they didn't specifically do maths, English, science. It's just any time they were timetable for that, they were working on their projects. So it's a big, I guess, a big commitment and a big chunk of time to put to it. But that's one thing that actually worked really well. And I'll talk a bit more about those projects later, because some of them being really neat. So I've got a few images that speak to how it's been. I mean, as it always is, right? Yeah. Perhaps a bit more relevant to this year, a bit more sporty as well. Now, it wasn't quite this bad, but it's been challenging for sure. But just, I guess, a few things to point out first. Oh, nice, another sports one. You internet fans will recognize this guy. Yeah, so what we ended up with was really neat 2 year 9 classes. All right, really neat group of kids. Generally speaking, the girls who put their hands up were just awesome all-rounders. And we've talked about it a bit as the teachers and with the kids, but it's perhaps a bit of a reflection on society that the girls who are good at sports are expected to be good at everything. But we had some boys who were pretty good at sports who struggled otherwise. And for, yeah, we ended up with pretty much the entire under 14 boys rugby team across the 2 classes, which was a bit of fun. But if you can imagine having, you know, the entire squad of our rugby team together all the time, that presented some challenges as well. So the way it played out, we still kept with those loose themes for each term. In the end, we found it really hard to fit in that integration, the getting through, I guess, a term's worth of content, or like the kind of the skills at least, in 4 to 6 weeks just proved a bit too much to get done. So we ended up with 8 weeks of let's get all the maths done as best as we can. And then with, you know, like a little bit of crossover here and there, but really it was just, we had 8 weeks of the maths time we need for our maths. And it was a similar story in the other subjects. But we did stick to those last 2 weeks for the project. However, what we ended up doing more in response to the students that were, I guess, that were in the classes, was that what ended up as the strongest running theme throughout everything was the values and the expectations that we really drilled into them. And that's where, from looking at these kids now compared to where they were in term 1, that's where absolutely the biggest gains have been. And it's fun. They recognize it as well. But yeah, it was pretty crazy to start out, for sure. But where they are now, much better able to manage themselves. yeah, that's really great. So a few other points as well. So this idea of using sport, it did work really well as a hook, and it continues to. So whatever we've been doing, as soon as kind of they got a few skills, if I bring in a sports example or anything like that, it does just with these kids. They're like, whoa, I'm into it all of a sudden. The sport is a reward. So if we say, right, oh, I probably should have mentioned in the structure of our school, we do 3 100-minute blocks a day, which gives a, has challenges, fine, but one of the great things is having the flexibility to plan each block and shift things around. And say they work really well for an hour, then maybe for the last half an hour, we can go outside and play some games or run around. And some of them really need that. Some of them you can send them out to run a quick lap mid-lesson because they've got some energy to burn. But yeah, we've quite enjoyed bringing this in. We've got little competitions that run and things like that, but it really motivates them, and it's been really cool. And almost everyone is really keen to hustle and get their work done if it means they get to go outside. So that's been really cool. And I guess tied in with that is our kids aren't lazy. I've struggled, plenty of teenagers can be quite mopey and hard to get moving, but our kids certainly haven't been. Yeah, the challenge is keeping them still, but that's got some real benefits as well. And yeah, a few other things I've talked about. The competitive element has had its ups and downs. Again, having all these, pretty much the whole rugby team together, there's a lot of personalities and egos involved. We do have a good spread of other sports as well. We've got quite a lot of hockey and football players, netball players, quite a few surfers, and then a handful who like mountain biking, and then even some kid who's really good at fishing and stuff like that. But yeah, quite a lot of competitiveness, which if you can manage it can be really good, but has presented some challenges as well when things go too far. And these kids have a very, very keen sense of justice, and if things don't seem fair, then everything goes out the window. And yeah, the boys have been the big challenge. The girls have been for the most part, the real blue sky. This is the best it could be, but the boys, yeah, it's been tough. And then the biggest challenge, I suppose, from what we intended to do originally, was just that integration just takes so much planning. And anyone who's tried that will speak to that unless you've got time to do it, an ongoing time provided to make it work, it's so hard to do well. And yeah, that's why, especially with the year that we've had, when it came to it, integration did take a bit of a back seat in terms of crossing over with other subjects, content-wise. I want to talk about a couple of things that did work really well. And this is with the, again, very early on, we realized that a lot of work was going to have to go into helping these kids manage themselves. So before we could give them a bit more freedom with their learning to start crossing over with science and whatever, we knew that they needed to grow up a bit. So we had really good buy-in with bringing in a lot of the All Blacks. They've got these kind of 15 commandments, and we had a few favorites. So number one was the sweep the sheds. So the idea that everyone contributes, no one's too good to do the small jobs and things like that. And especially for a few of the kids who reckon they would be the next Bowden Barrett or whatever. It was nice to just see them take a step, and some still struggle with it. They don't like cleaning up and they don't think they should have to, but for the most part, taking that approach of, this is our space, we've got to own it and treat it with respect has been good. Another one was this one of go for the gap. And for the All Blacks, this is them talking about trying to target their weaknesses, so to work on their weaknesses to improve themselves as overall players. And for our learners, it was about being, I guess, open and honest about what we don't know or what we're struggling with, so that we can then work on that. And that's been quite cool to help shift some of the mindset around failure and pre-tests and the value of those to help identify what you don't know and things like that. Keeping a blue head. So this is their way of saying keeping calm under pressure, as opposed to a red head, I suppose. But again, needed for some more than others. But this has been a nice one for some who have some quick tempers and can't handle it. And probably the most important one was no dickheads, which if you know year 9 boys, some of them can struggle with this a lot. But hey, it's been, if the All Blacks say it, we're allowed to say it. So we've said it a lot to these kids this year. But hey, they've got on with it quite a bit. Now, hopefully this works. What I have is a video. We had an open night. It was actually to the night that the lockdown was announced back in August. And these 2 girls had recorded a bit of a speech for that. So I'll let them speak about their experience a little bit, and hopefully it will all work.
Hi, I'm Indra and this is Ruby. We're Year 9 students here in our 1 Learning Through Sports class. Being in the sports class doesn't mean all we do is play sport and no time for work. I was offered to be in the Learning Through Sports class last year, but my family had lots of reservations on what actually being in the sports class meant. I didn't end up getting into it as I was never given the opportunity to learn about it like you guys do tonight. What we mean by learning through sport is that majority of our learnings is sport-based. We do all the usual curriculum work, English, math, science, etc. But it's so that my peers and I can enjoy and interpret schoolwork a lot more willingly and effectively. I personally love working in the Learning Through Sports class as I'm really thriving and growing. For instance, in my social science class with Jenna Mackay, we had to find out about famous sports teams and stars who have made significant modifications towards their sport to help care for the environment. I learned so much about our environment as well as what our wonderful Black Sticks are doing to keep hockey a sustainable sport. Learning through sport really helped with our focus and passion towards learning.
To be a part of the Learning Through Sports class, you don't have to be the best at your game or play in 10 different teams. You just have to enjoy sports in general, whether it's playing, watching, or just the idea of it. As for the learning side, yes, we still do the normal curriculum with goals and scores we must achieve each term, but the only thing that's different is the way we learn and practice those things. Such as in math, we designed an obstacle course for Ultimate Athlete. We had to draw it all up in 3D, then find the area, perimeter, and name of the shape and angles inside of it. Doing that helped us practice what we had learned from that term and look at it from a sporting perspective. I think that being a part of the Learning Through Sports class this year has helped me stay focused on what we were learning by the way every subject is engaging and gets us involved. Thanks.
All right, so yeah, that was a few of the girls in my class, Ruby and Indra, who are prime examples of the wonderful young women that we have who are great at sports and take that and apply it across the board. So yeah, I really loved hearing what they had to say about it. And as far as I know, they didn't get any brief on what to say. They just got asked to write about their experience in the class. And that was what they came up with. And so really nice to hear that in terms of the goals that we'd set out with what we wanted to provide for learning, it seems like we hit the mark reasonably well there. So while it wasn't totally integrated, the sport was a common theme and these values came through as well. So that was really nice. So a couple of things that they talked about here. Sorry, there we go. They talked about assessment or end of topic test that they did for geometry and measurement about Ultimate Athlete. So Ultimate Athlete is a big obstacle course race that they do, and they had it here at the Mount back in July, and a bunch of our kids took part in the school's event. And I saw what we had used in the past for our geometry and measurement tasks, where it was design a garden with some sculptures and things like that. But I saw a cool opportunity there to do the same thing, but why not make it about Ultimate Athlete? So there's 2 parts to it. One where they designed a new logo, and then as Ruby talked about, they designed an obstacle course as well, and they had to do a plan view of it. The premise was that this was going to be a series taken nationally, and they needed to have a course that would fit on any rugby field, so it could be moved around. So they had to plot coordinates of all these obstacles, and then they had to choose a few of them to draw in 3D isometric and then calculate things like the base perimeter and then surface area and the volume of them for reasons that we kind of made up. And it was great. Probably in terms of what we've been able to do this year and bring in that sport element, yeah, one of the most authentic, and the results were great. The kids really got into it. They didn't necessarily think too much about what they were doing. They just drew what worked and then worked backwards to figure out what they needed to in terms of the maths of it, having realized they'd already pretty much done it. So yeah, this big win in terms of how that went. Yeah, I think the girls talked a bit about some of the projects they've done in other, or things they've done in other subjects as well. And yeah, it's been like in English, lots of texts about sports players or sports stories, and film, again, about with sports involved. And it's just worked really well for getting kids into it. I think science had a pretty hard time with kind of the curriculum at year 9, bringing sports meaningfully into that, but they've done a really good job where they could, and that's been great. So whether it's talking about energy or digestion, whatever it is. And then of course, PE and health had a pretty easy time incorporating sports into theirs. But yeah, so this was probably the big win in terms of this ultimate athlete assessment, if you like, but I think it gave kids a really good chance to perform as well as they could in an assessment, and they actually quite enjoyed it. So win-win. Just wanted to talk a bit about the projects that we offer as well. So with each of these, they related a little bit to the themes for each term. And we started off term 1, they had an individual project looking at issues within their sport. And we had some kids produce really good, like informational flyers or little mini ad clips about, say, dealing with parental pressure on the sidelines and things like that. A few looked at performance enhancing drugs. A few looked at ways to target racism. A few even got involved in considering transgender athlete inclusion. So really like meaty topics, and the kids got into those. Second project was a bit more technology focused, and we had some pretty crazy ideas, including robot referees, and then a few other nifty ones. And then, yeah, the one we did at the end of last term was adapting a sport that they already had to make it more inclusive, sustainable, or COVID friendly, and then thinking about ways to do that, which was pretty neat. But yeah, I mean, I had reservations at first about giving up really valuable time to do like these inquiry projects. But having seen the kids come through and the skills that they've built up through it and the collaboration that happens and all that, yeah, in terms of key competencies, they've been fantastic. So I'd happily give up a couple of weeks of class time for it in the future, even if it does really put the pressure on that remaining 8 weeks that you have to cram everything into it. But yeah, it's been one really neat thing to be involved in that I haven't really seen much of before as a maths teacher. So a couple of final things, I suppose. We've opened up our applications for next year, and at least 93% of the current year 9s have reapplied to continue next year. For those who didn't, it's cool if you are leaving. We get a lot of our good sports people get poached by Tauranga boys, which is a shame, but the majority who are staying at school are keen to be involved again. We can see, really clear, big academic and attitude gains. And I talked about these boys at the start who were the struggle, but they're the ones who have absolutely made the biggest progress. And, I'd like to think that if they were in a different class, they would have made progress as well. But I can confidently say that, having been with us, they've done at least as well as they would have otherwise. And speaking to the boys about it, it's really neat hearing their reflections on how far they've come and Yeah, and that's really cool. We have through our through the hard work and getting through the ups and downs with them, we do have built up these great relationships with the kids. And well, again, with the competitiveness and things like that, tempers do get frayed sometimes, but yeah, for the most part, I think we've got a really neat group. And term 4 now, we're actually really enjoying most days because we've got that really solid foundation, and that's been great, because there were some dark days back in term 1, but yeah, nice to enjoy that now. Again, most of the students do, if you ask them if would they rather have been somewhere else, or do they think that they would have done as well somewhere else, most think that they've done better where they are. That's a really hard thing to manage, or sorry, to measure, but certainly our test results and things like that have been at least as good as anywhere else in the school. But I think those responses from the students and their feedback really speaks to that success. And as I said, the projects have been great. But yeah, the big ones that haven't gone so well, integration hasn't happened nearly as much as we'd hoped. Yeah, I laugh about this because I don't want to cry, but it has taken so much work with a lot of these boys to get them to a point where they can manage themselves well. And then last thing that, hey, sorry, not sorry, we do have competitions between learning communities or commons, and the others do get annoyed that we have all the good sports people, but yeah, it is what it is, and it will continue to be that way. So they've been really good. So yeah, looking forward, next year we're going to have in the same learning commons both the new year 9s coming in, and this year's year 9s going forward to year 10. So all 4 classes will be learning through sport. There are some other themes being considered to trial in other commons. So because yeah, people see what we've done and it's worked fairly well. We've got talk of a performing arts commons, so kids who are into their drama and love the production and things like that, get them all together, which will be a pretty crazy mix in a different way, but things like that. Just this is a bit of a blueprint or a framework for a theme-based approach, not necessarily integrated, but that theme having some success. And then certainly for us in our learning commons, we hope to, now that we've got most of things figured out, we can then take it a step further and get a bit more integration happening, especially now that we just know a bit better what everyone else is doing. And then we've also got, for some of our senior courses for next year, some sports themed courses being brought in as well. One, well, in particular, the head of English who's been involved with our year 9s this year, he's offered some sports themed senior English classes. So like, for example, much as we have done with the year 9s, where all their texts that they look at and the creative writing, everything else is based around sport, it'll be the same at the senior level, but just saying, hey, why not ask kids if they want to get together with a similar group and all do similar things? Because yeah, you don't want to just force that on a standard group, because sport can have the opposite effect. But yeah, so that's what we've got. And it's been good fun. And just while I'm here as well, thinking of next year, as everyone is right now, we are hiring. There's a role coming up with the UMS, so the year 9s and 10s. If you love year 9s and 10s, then come on down. Yeah, the Bay Plenty is pretty good. Nice and sunny right now. But yeah, you can look us up if you're interested. All right, so that's what I've got. And now hopefully you got some questions. But yeah, thanks for paying attention.